All right, hello again. This is Jeff Scott of Blackhawk Technical College, and I'll be coming at you right now with Chapter 9 from our daily SAM's Teach Yourself, AngularJS, JavaScript, and jQuery all in one text. The text that will be used for both 152, 167 Ajax and JavaScript website development and 152, 164 design and implementation projects for the spring 2016 semester at Blackhawk Technical College. Chapter 9, as you can see up here, is called Applying JavaScript and jQuery events for richly interactive web pages. So, our objectives, ways that events can be triggered by the browser and user, what properties are accessible on event objects, how to add handlers that are able to dynamically respond to events, ways to pass extra data to event handlers, methods to manually trigger events, ways to create your own custom events, how to implement and fire off callback functions in your code. All right. Like most other languages, when you're working with JavaScript and jQuery, they're pretty much event-driven. So the system is sitting there waiting for something to happen. All right. It's waiting for you to click a button. It's waiting for something to happen, whether it be based on something you do or something even that's time-based, possibly. So as they say there, one of the major goals for AngularJS, jQuery, and JavaScript is to provide developers with the capability to create incredibly sophisticated and richly active web pages. At the heart of this are events, which are basically happen anytime the browser environment, something happens. Understanding events is the idea of this lesson. So it says you learn the concepts required to understand events and how to utilize them to help build rich interactive web pages. All right, AngularJS utilizes the underlying JavaScript and jQuery functionality in this lesson, but also has some additional functionality that we'll cover way towards the end of the class. Okay? All right. So, understanding the event process. As it says, the event handling process is fairly simple to catch on to at a high level. You click a button or you do something on a web page and something happens. All right? So it says the following describes the important things that happen when a user interacts with a web page or a browser window. Number one, a physical event happens. All right, so something happens. You click on a button, you move a mouse, you press a keyboard, the keyboard, whatever, which means that two events are triggered in the browser. And as mentioned, sometimes multiple events at the same time. For example, when you type a key on the keyboard, key press, key down, and key up events are all triggered. 3, the browser creates an object for the event. The web browser creates a separate object for each event that's triggered. Most of these events you will not set up code for, but you can for any and all. User event handlers are called. It says there are 3 phases that event handlers can be acted in. And that is the capturing phase. All right. And you can look at it with the capturing phase as you're going from the top down, the bubbling phase when you're going from the bottom up, and the target phase, as it says. It occurs when the HTML event is initially triggered. Now, I probably won't be able to find it, but I think it was here. I added, in fact, I know where it is. Come on. That's nice. All right, I added an article onto both the 167 and 164 folders, so I'll just grab the one for the 164, and it's called Bubbling and Capturing. So let's take a second and go over that. As it says, DOM events can be nested inside of each other, and somehow the handler of the parent works even if you click on its child. Shouldn't look like that, but that's okay. The reason is event bubbling. And as it says, for example, the following div runs even if you click the next nested tag like M or code. That's because an event bubbles from the nested tag up and triggers the event. So as it says, the main principle of bubbling states that after an event triggers on the deepest possible element, that's where it fires first, and then it works its way up the stack, so to speak. They're trying to show that here. I don't know if that's a great picture or not a great picture, but it's the one I've used in the past, and I kind of like it. The bubbling goes right to the top. When an event occurs on an element, it will bubble up right to the HTML tag itself, triggering handlers on its way. But a handler may decide it is fully processed and stop the bubbling. On the other hand, you have capturing. And it says, in all browsers except IE less than version 9, there are 2 stages of event processing. The event first goes down, called capturing, and then bubbles up. And as it says, this is standardized in the W3 specification. So it says here, all methods of event handling, well, I'm going to have to run spell check on here. I didn't write this. Ignore the capturing phase, okay? Use add event listener with last argument true is the only way to catch the event at the capturing phase. All right, so that was very quick, probably too quick. Events first are captured down at the deepest level, and then they bubble up. In IE less than version 9, they only bubble up. All handlers work on bubbling stage except the event listener. And bubbling and capturing can be stopped with a cancel bubble or a stop propagation. All right, that'll be out there if you have an interest in taking a look at it, okay? And there it's shown pictorially also on page 237 of the book. So, event objects get created by the browser when it detects that an event has occurred. If the event handler is defined by AngularJS or jQuery, the event object is converted to a jQuery object because it has a few more attributes and methods to work with it. So you need to be aware of what event object type you're working with. And some of the major ones are shown right here. I'm not going to go over any of those, but you can see them if you take a look. This is all of page 238 and the top half of page 239. An event type is a keyword, as it says, that's used by JavaScript, jQuery, or AngularJS. It identifies that a physical event takes place, and then you can attach an event handler to that to make something happen. Whatever you want to or need to have happen. As mentioned here, JavaScript provides several event types that correspond to different events that occur during a dynamic page interaction. And you can see some of them here that takes up all of page 240 and the top half of page 241. All right. When an HTML document loads, as mentioned right here, the JavaScript code that's specified in the script tag is loaded and executing, but that will depend on where you put the tag. All right. Some books say that the tag should be up in the head section. Some say it should be in the body section. And that includes your tags for your JavaScript and even the jQuery tag itself. Those who say that it should go into the body section say that since the head loads first, then if you put it in the body section, you can make sure that you can use anything that was defined up in the head. Other people say no, it should be at the beginning. All right. Typically, as it says, JavaScript and jQuery logic will be inside functions that you will execute when you want something to happen or when something does happen. The problem is that the HTML element objects may have not yet built the browser to that point. All right. That's why it says this is where that load event is especially handy. We'll talk about that. We've looked at this before in the JavaScript class. So for instance, right here, we've got body onload equal onload handler, which says that once it has been loaded, then you want to call it. So the second method you can do is to assign it directly to the window object. So these two things are going to do the exact same thing here. So again, as it says, you can first attach your initialization code to the onload event, all right, or you can assign it directly to the window object. In jQuery, initialization code is triggered and executed at 2 times. First, when the DOM is ready, and next, when the document and its resources have fully loaded. So if you use the .ready jQuery method, as it says, it will trigger initialization code when the DOM is fully ready. All right, and the shortcut, so to speak, is like this. Using the load event, jQuery will trigger the initialization code after all page resources have loaded and are rendered to the user. So notice, big caution here. Page 242, the ready and load methods are not compatible using the onload attribute in the body tag. If you're using jQuery, use the .ready or the .load. If you're not using jQuery, then use the onload attribute. All right. To provide interaction to events that occur on a web page, an event handler must be added for each specific event that you want to handle with code. All right. In this example, as it says, here's an event handler that changes the text displayed in all paragraph elements to clicked. Several methods allow you to add handlers to DOM elements, and some of them are going to be displayed below here, starting on page 243. So as mentioned here, the most basic methods of adding an event handler is to add it directly in the HTML code. The advantage of doing this is that it's simple and it's easy. The disadvantage, so to speak, of doing this is now you're kind of intermixing JavaScript or JavaScript-related code with HTML code. So event handlers are added to DOM objects by setting the value of the handler attribute in the tag statement. So here's an example. Div onClick equal click handler, click here. All right. And then someplace in your code you would have to have a function called click handler that would handle it. Now some people think that that's a very good way to do things, and other people think that's a very dirty, clumsy way of doing things. All right. You can also include a DOM event handler, or object I should say, as a parameter to the event handling using the event keyword, like this. The advantage of that is, as mentioned, it allows you to access the event information in the event handler. You can also define that specific arguments are passed to an event. All right. Parameters can be numbers or strings surrounded by single quotes, or even the ID of particular DOM elements. The example that's shown here where I've got the mouse resting, as it says, the following code adds event handlers that pass the event object as well as the DOM object for the H1 element with an ID of heading, along with a number and a string. When clicked, the elements would call the following function and use the DOM object's inner HTML property to change the text, to reset things accordingly. As mentioned here, there are disadvantages to this method. The DOM element has to be defined in the HTML, is never removed, and is read dynamically. The big part is the never remove there because you're starting to get some bloat. The second is if you want the same handler assigned to several events, you have to code the tag to every one of them in HTML. So typically, unless it's a very simplistic example with very little JavaScript, it isn't done that way. Middle of page 244, adding event handlers in JavaScript. As mentioned here, you can also add and remove event handlers dynamically to DOM objects inside of JavaScript code. The advantage is you can dynamically add event handlers at any point in time. All right. So you can add them after the page is loaded. To do this, you call the add event listener on the DOM object. And as mentioned here, it takes 3 parameters: an event type, a function to call, and a Boolean that specifies true if the handler should be called during the capture phase and the bubbling phase, or false if it's only during the bubbling phase. The trick, as mentioned here, with using this is how to pass custom data to a handler call. And they show an example of this. This is getting pretty heavy. So they mention here what's going on in the add event listener calls on this page. All right, it says the event type click is specified when a new anonymous function with no name is defined that accepts every object as the only parameters inside of the only parameters represented by something that's called E, as you can see right here. Inside the wrapper function, so the function within the function, the actual event handler is called with the custom parameters, including the E variable and false, which means that this should only be done during the bubbling phase. Okay? You can remove event handlers from the event using remove event listener. You need to specify the event type and the name of the handler to remove, and they show some examples here. So let's take a look at the example that's on the next several pages, 245 through page 248, so we can see what's going on here. As always, we'll go over a couple of the steps, and the code itself is in figures 9 or listings 9.1, 9.2, and 9.3. So as it says, we're going to attach event handlers to DOM objects dynamically using the JavaScript method. All right, so they tell you how to build this. And they say here, once the broken event.js, open that file, and the following function will be used to click events. Notice it takes several arguments. The first argument is the DOM element event object itself, which it uses to get the X position of the screen. It also grabs an object ID used to get the object that should be written to, and the remaining arguments that are there are used to write out the message. The inner HTML of the object is specified there. After we do this, we create wrapper functions that are used to pass arguments to the actual event handler. As it says, they only accept the event argument E, which is the event object, as a parameter. They call the click handler event for the appropriate functions. All right, so let's take a look at this. The best method is mentioned there to attach an event handler to the DOM is to use jQuery, probably because it's the most straightforward way of doing it. In the past, typically what you'd use would be bind, unbind, delegate, and undelegate to do this. And as mentioned, the bind method mimics the behavior of add event listener, and delegate makes it possible to add a jQuery object and then, as additional child elements, add them to the event handler. As of jQuery 1.7, and we're way after that, these methods have been replaced with a simple on and off. Event handlers are attached to jQuery objects using the on method, which can be called in the two formats that are shown here on page 249. Now, I'm not going to run over these because I'd just be reading this stuff to you. We looked at mapping in a previous chapter. So that's how you turn the events on. And as mentioned, to remove an event handler, you call the off method of the jQuery object. And there's the associated syntax. So we've got another try it out here that starts on page 250, and it runs through page 252. And it's called Adding Event Handlers Using jQuery. So here we're attaching event handlers to the DOM dynamically using the jQuery method. All right. Notice it says here, open the working event.js file on the following function that will be used to handle click events. The event takes only event argument E. It relies on the data portion of the event object to provide the object ID that the text should be used for. So in other words, this is going to be the same program that we just looked at. All right, except writing it the old-fashioned JavaScript way, we're writing it the newfangled jQuery way. Okay. And again, the source code is shown right after it. All right. Page 253, using the jQuery event helper function to assign event handlers. As it says, jQuery also provides helper functions that enable you to set an event handler. They're named after the event, so it's easier to look at and typically associate, whatever it is you're working with. So notice there's a click. There's one for mouse hovering events that's shown right here. And notice hover is equivalent to mouse enter and mouse leave. Now I've shown some of this stuff. For instance, when we've looked at different things, we've looked at toggle up, toggle down, or whatever it is, and as opposed to slide toggle. And we've looked at mouse enter, mouse leave as opposed to hover. Okay. Both JavaScript and jQuery allow you to trigger events manually, which provides advantages, as it says, such as simulating user interaction, tying page event interactions together, or creating your own custom events. The simplest way to trigger an event is to use an event object if there is one. And they give you some examples right here. So you can trigger the click event on almost any DOM object with the name of the object .click. And they show you some of the ones that can be used here on page 255 in the text. So let's look at this on pages 255, 256, 257, and 258. Whereas it says we step through the process of using an event handler from a span to trigger a click event on a different element. The result will be you can click the span element to select or deselect a checkbox. So these spans are taking the place of buttons, for lack of a better word. Some of the real power of this, as mentioned starting on page 258 and going on to 259, is the ability to trigger events manually. All right. So jQuery supports two different ways to trigger events manually. jQuery objects have methods that correspond to many of the event types that you can call directly. For instance, most elements have a click method or a double click method or both. Form elements all have blur and focus, key press, key down, and key up, etc. All right, so it says here the following statement triggers the click event for all span elements. So again, the type of element, dot, the type of event. jQuery also provides a way to trigger events while specifying the values of the object using the trigger method. And there's two syntaxes as shown right here. So again, as it says, this will trigger a click event for all elements that have a class of checkbox. Then we have an example down here of using the second method on all items with a class of big text. As mentioned, the method passes a simple event object, all right, for the key press event, and then sets the character code object to 13, which is the return key. So the next example that's on 259, 260, 261 steps through the process of using an event handler from a span to trigger a key press event on a text input element. The result, as mentioned, is that when you click on the span, you pass through the same event handlers as the keystroke in the input element. So let's take a look at that one. When you click on the spans, you pass through the same event handler as the keystroke in the input element. All right, and finally, as we're finishing this one up, again, we're going to go through all this stuff in class also. As mentioned, an extremely powerful aspect of the JavaScript and jQuery event handling mechanism is the ability to handle custom events. Custom events enable you to extend the events that can be happen to elements. They do not directly correspond to the physical interaction with the user, but rather to events that happen in your code based on interactions the user is performing. The advantage, as mentioned, is that you can use the already in place event handling system that allows you to add or remove elements, bubble them up, capture them, trigger them, whatever it is you want to do. So as mentioned here, adding a custom event in JavaScript is similar to triggering an event in that you trigger a custom event object and then initialize it. So here's an example. The first parameter that's here has the type name. The second has the bubble property set to true. The third sets the cancelable property to false. The fourth defines the details of the event. So as it says, the values of fire, ice, and time will be available via the details method or attribute in the event object. So after you do that, they show you how you'd be able to trigger that. Now that's again doing it more in JavaScript. If you want to add them using jQuery, as it says, it's a simple process. It's a matter of calling the event trigger and passing it the new object. You must specify a type attribute for the event object, but afterwards you can basically do whatever it is you want. Another advantage of using jQuery, and we talked about this previously in other lectures, is the fact that you can have callbacks. And a callback, basically, as mentioned, is a function that can be registered in jQuery and then fired off at specific times in your code. Quite often, the reason that you use a callback is that a lot of times you've got functions that take two parameters. All right, one might be, how fast or whatever you want, want something to occur or whatever it is. The other one, which is typically optional, is a callback, which says once that function has finished, you can call another function to have something happen. All right. So as mentioned, an example of where callbacks are useful is if you want users that they have the option to specify that they want a notification when a background process, such as downloading data via AJAX, is completed. So when the download completes, the callback function will execute, maybe give an alert or do something else. All right. So as it says, the callback mechanism is used by calling $.callbacks flags to create a callbacks object. You can read the stuff that's in here. Again, we'll take a look at this later on in class. And finally, jQuery provides an option to implement callbacks in a different way, which is known as a deferred object. As you can see right there, a deferred object is an object that contains a set of functions that can be run at a later time. So the actual arguments are not added until the deferred object is resolved and the functions are executed. This allows you to apply a set of functions to a single object that can be applied at any time or based on whatever it is. That pretty much finishes up Chapter 9. 2 more chapters to go here, and that's Chapter 10, Dynamically Accessing and Manipulating Web Pages with JavaScript and jQuery, and Chapter 11, which is on working with window browser and other non-page web elements.